Hey everyone, it's Miss Matthews. Today we are going to be talking about some of the reforms that come out of the Industrial Revolutions and some of the new economic movements that also come out of the Industrial Revolution. So questions to consider: what are the changes to society as a result from the Industrial Revolution? What are the differences between conservatism and liberalism? And then finally, what are the differences between capitalism, socialism, and communism? List of key terms. Make sure you sort of keep an eye out for all of these as we go through this video. So, what we see come out of the Industrial Revolution, out of sort of these political revolutions, we start to see two distinct ideologies begin to emerge. The first of which is conservatism. These are the traditionalists in Europe. These are the folks who want to see everything go back to the way it was before revolutions. They sort of emphasize the bonds of social order. They defend sort of ancestral institutions over individualism. They are very much traditional. They appreciate customs and convention. They are very much, in every sense of the word, traditionalist. So some key figures in conservatism, we're going to see Edmund Burke and then Clemens von Metternich, who is an Austrian prince who plays sort of a big role in helping reshape Europe after Napoleon. Conservatives are typically wealthy property owners and nobility. Again, these are groups of people who want to keep the status quo. They want to maintain and restore a balance of power. They want things to go back to the good old days. And they argue for protecting traditional monarchs of Europe. So we are going to see that conservatives are going to sort of be fighting against a lot of new ideas that come out of political revolutions and the Industrial Revolution. And what they're fighting against is liberalism. These are the change makers. These are the folks who sort of see these revolutions, see political revolutions and the Industrial Revolution, and start to think that they can change society for the better. We see that liberalism sort of has its origins in the Enlightenment, starting to think of including people, your average everyday people, in government. We see liberals emphasize popular sovereignty, or more people having votes in government. They emphasize individual rights and self-interest. And even though they sort of advocate for all these things, there's still sort of a debate in society who should be allowed to actively participate in its governance. We're going to see that even though suffrage or voting starts to expand beyond wealthy property owners, it doesn't necessarily get to everyone. So some important figures in liberalism, we're going to see Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and these are mostly middle-class business leaders and merchants. So the middle class is formed by this Industrial Revolution, and we are going to see that people in that middle class are the ones who are advocating for more rights. Again, there's an emphasis on securing the freedom of individuals and limiting the power of government. They're advocating for civil liberties. They believe in private property. They believe in laissez-faire economic policy, which we'll talk about a little later. And they want to give more power to elected parliaments, but there are only the educated and landowners could vote. So they're sort of looking to extend who can exactly vote and participate in government. So we've got these two competing ideologies that sort of come from political revolutions, come from the Industrial Revolution, And we're going to see that as a result of the Industrial Revolution, as a result of all of these really rapid changes, we're going to start to see some big changes and reforms. And so sort of the first big one I want to talk about is the creation of the middle class. So if we think back to absolutism, if we think back to feudalism in Europe, there's a very well-defined social hierarchy with kings at the top and then nobility. And at the very, very bottom, we've sort of got the lower class, the peasants. There's not really anything in the middle. You're either a peasant or you're a noble. And we start to see with the Industrial Revolution, we start to see people changing their social class. We start to see people being able to move up into this new social class, into this middle class. And even though we do see the emergence of this middle class, we still do see a hierarchy. We see nobility and old money at the top. We see this middle class or bourgeoisie sort of be in the middle, the bankers, the merchants, shopkeepers, artisans. And then at the very bottom, we still do have peasants who we sort of can refer to as the proletariat. And these peasants, they start to become factory workers as factories begin to grow and spread across Europe. And we're going to see that the proletariat is 80% of the population in Europe. So we still see peasants sort of as the largest social class at the bottom of that social hierarchy. And these people in the middle class are liberals. They believe in liberalism. They have strong feelings of nationalism. And we start to see that this creation of the middle class makes society more diverse, but also less unified. There's still a large gap between the nobility and the wealthy, and then this working class. So even though there's sort of a new step, there's still a really big difference between the haves and the have-nots. We also see, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, we start to see labor unions play a big role in trying to enact change. Factories were not the greatest place to work. You have incredibly long work days. Children as young as 5 are working, 10 to 14 hours a day. There are no safety precautions. People die pretty regularly in these factories. And so we start to see groups of people come together and try to fight for sort of basic rights, basic worker rights. And so leaders begin organizing these labor unions, and union action has led to improved working conditions, better wages, reduced work hours. The reason we have a 5-day work week, the reason why there is an 8-hour workday, is because of labor unions. So as a result of the Industrial Revolution, this is when we really start to see labor unions take an active role in trying to improve working conditions. We also see what we call urbanization, or sort of moving people into cities from the country. We start to see towns and cities becoming larger. Cities are becoming sort of industrial centers. And with all these people sort of moving into a smaller space, we're going to start to see that living conditions are pretty poor in cities. We see that there's a lot of sickness because there are a lot of people living close together. And sort of from these poor conditions, we actually start to see the public health movement begin. And they sort of have this radical idea that you can prevent disease by sort of cleaning up after yourself. And we see it helps improve medical knowledge. We see that it leads to better nutrition and better housing. And we also start to see that urbanization leads to rapid population growth. The Industrial Revolution also starts to see defined gender roles begin to emerge. Now, in sort of the rural countryside where you are sort of working on a farm, you have a lot of people sort of doing the same jobs and all working together to sort of make this farm work. But as we start to see the creation of a middle class, and sort of having more, having better finances, we start to see women and men move into what we call separate spheres. We start to see after 1850 that increasingly women are sort of being pushed into these defined gender roles where they're staying home, taking care of the home, taking care of children, while men are out working. So not to say that gender roles did not exist before the Industrial Revolution, but we really start to see strict, defined gender roles come out of the Industrial Revolution. And finally, education. The state's role in education became more involved as a result of the Industrial Revolution. When child labor laws are passed, you now have a large part of the population that you can sort of require to go to school. We see that there is a significant increase in literacy or having people be able to read. And we see education, even though it is sort of more squarely focused on men, we do see education being seen as a means to improve economic and marriage prospects for girls. So those are some changes we see as a result of the Industrial Revolution. But we're also going to start to see different economic movements sort of emerge out of the Industrial Revolution, people trying to think of what the best way to set up new economies. And one of the biggest movements that we sort of see come out is capitalism. And capitalism is an economic system in which the factors of production are privately owned and money is invested in business ventures to make a profit. So we see that capitalism is sort of this idea of a self-made person, that someone is making money, that they sort of own the means of production, they make everything, they then sell it to individuals, and they get all of that profit. So one of the most important capitalists that you should know is Adam Smith. And capitalists use the profits that they make themselves to sort of reinvest money into their business to help it grow. We see a lot of the middle class strongly believes in capitalism because it is how they become members of the middle class. They are able to invest their money in factories and sort of build up their wealth that way. And capitalists are really going to believe in the Industrial Revolution as a positive change. So sort of focusing on Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So right around the time we start to see sort of the first industrialized countries. And Adam Smith is a strong believer in no government interference in the economy. He strongly believes that individuals should be the ones who are sort of driving the market, and the government should have sort of no say in what is going on in the economy. He sort of proposes 3 laws of economics: the law of self-interest, i.e. people work for their own good; the law of competition, meaning competition forces people to make a better product; and then finally the law of supply and demand. Enough goods would be produced at the lowest possible price to meet the demand in a market economy. So basically, you try to produce enough goods to meet the demand or what people want in an economy. And his sort of push for no government interference sort of gives us this idea of laissez-faire economics, which is really letting business owners, factory owners sort of set working conditions without interference. So again, not having any government say in what the economy is doing. So on the flip side of capitalism, we sort of see socialism. And socialism is an economic system in which factors of production are owned by the public or the state and sort of operate for the welfare of all. So where capitalism is sort of focusing on the individual and making profit for the individual, socialism really looks at society as a whole and says, okay, how do we make this society better for everyone, not just some people? And so key figures in socialism, you should know, are Robert Owen. He's sort of the big one. And socialism really thinks that the government should be involved in helping plan the economy because, again, they want the economy to work for everyone, not just a select few. And they think that the control that the government has over the economy would help end poverty and promote equality, help workers. And they really see the Industrial Revolution as a negative change because it really does pit people against each other to try and make a profit. And then finally, we sort of see the emergence of communism sort of stemming from socialism. And so communism is a complete form of socialism where factors of production are owned by the people. So rather than the state or the government sort of owning everything, the factors of production would be owned by every single person living in that state. So when we think about communism, we automatically think of Karl Marx. Some factors around communism, we see private property would not exist, all goods and services are shared equally, and communists also view the Industrial Revolution as a negative change. So going back to Karl Marx writes the Communist Manifesto in 1848 with Friedrich Engels, and Marx sort of sees the Industrial Revolution and sort of sees the changes that happen, and sort of has a really negative reaction to it. In the Communist Manifesto, he sort of lays out that society sort of has always been a struggle between warring classes. The rich get richer and the poor sort of perform back-breaking labor without sort of any sort of betterment to their status. And the Industrial Revolution sort of amplifies that divide, right? You've got the factory workers who before a lot of the reforms are working 14-hour days in unsafe working conditions, but the wealthy just sort of get rich off of their labor. And so Marx sort of predicts that a large proletariat, which remember 80% of Europe at this time is part of this proletariat class, he sort of predicts that the proletariat revolts, would seize factories, and sort of just produce what society needs. And we see that Marx's ideas will take root in Russia, China, Cuba, lots of different places sort of all over the world. So some key takeaways for the Industrial Revolution. We see that the Industrial Revolution leads to many changes, including the rise of labor unions, urbanization, public health, creation of the middle class, among other things. We see conservatism sort of aims to maintain the status quo in Europe, while liberalism sort of looks to change society. And as a result of the Industrial Revolution, 3 new economic ideologies are born: capitalism, socialism, and communism. So thanks for watching. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later.